Mark had always been proud of his fire truck. It wasn't just any vehicle light, was a restored vintage beauty, a shining symbol of years spent serving his town's fire department. After retiring, Mark dedicated countless hours to bringing the truck back to life. Polishing the chrome, fixing the engine, and restoring every detail was more than a hobby. It was a tribute to a lifetime of service. So when he finally parked the fire truck in front of his home, a modest house nestled in a quiet neighborhood, it felt like a moment of well-earned pride. Every morning, Mark would step outside to see the truck gleaming in the sunlight, a reminder of hard work and dedication. Neighbors often stopped by to admire the vehicle, and children's faces lit up when he shared stories about his firefighting days. Life was peaceful. Mark and his wife Emma enjoyed quiet evenings on their porch, watching the stars and reminiscing about old times. The fire truck was more than a vehicle, it was part of their family's story. Then, one afternoon, everything changed. Mark received a letter from the neighborhood's management group. The tone was polite but firm. A fine had been issued for parking in violation of community rules. The letter explained that vehicles of a certain size were not permitted to be parked on the street or driveway for extended periods. Mark reread the letter several times. Didn't make sense. The fire truck was parked responsibly, neatly aligned with the curb, and hadn't caused any problems. More than that, it was a symbol of service, a source of pride, and a connection to the community's history. He called the number listed on the letter to get more information. The voice on the other end was polite, but unyielding. The rules and the fine would stand unless the truck was removed. Mark hung up, a knot tightening in his chest. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. The truck had been a positive part of the neighborhood for months. Why now was it suddenly a problem? He shared the news with Emma that evening. She listened quietly, then took his hand. "We'll figure this out," she said. "You've always stood up for what you believe in. This is no different." Mark appreciated her calm, steady support. It was comforting to know Emma was by his side, determined not to let the fine go unanswered. Mark began reaching out to old friends from his firefighting days. His crew was more than just colleagues. They were like family, bonded by years of shared experience and trust. The next evening, Mark hosted a small gathering in his garage. The fire truck stood proudly nearby, its bright red paint gleaming under the lights. His crew arrived one by one, shaking hands and sharing smiles. "What's the situation?" asked Jim, one of Mark's closest friends and fellow firefighter. Mark explained the fine and the unexpected obstacle it created. "That's ridiculous," Jim said, shaking his head. "You shouldn't have to hide that truck. It's part of who you are." The crew nodded in agreement, a sense of solidarity filling the space. They remembered the times they had fought fires together, the calls that had tested their strength and courage. But tonight wasn't about battles with flames, it was about standing up for something just as important: pride and respect. "We need to respond," Mark said. "Not with anger, but with something clever. Something that shows we're not backing down, but also that we respect the neighborhood." Ideas began to flow. Some were funny, others bold. Everyone wanted to make a statement, but one that would be remembered for all the right reasons. As the night wore on, the crew's determination grew. This wasn't just about a finish, it was about standing up for a symbol of service. For the hard work and dedication that fire truck represented, Mark looked around at his friends, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. They had his back no matter what. When the crew left, Mark stood outside, gazing at the fire truck bathed in moonlight. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready. This was just the beginning. The next morning, sunlight filtered softly through the kitchen window as Mark sipped his coffee, thinking about the night's conversation. The fire truck gleamed. Outside, its red paint reflecting years of memories and hard work. The fine still weighed heavily on his mind, but the support from his crew gave him hope. Mark knew he couldn't face this challenge alone. So he picked up the phone and began reaching out to his longtime firefighting friends. The same people who had stood beside him through thick and thin. Each call sparked a familiar, warmth-stirred stories, laughter, and a common understanding that went beyond words. By late afternoon, the crew had agreed to meet again, this time at Mark's house. The plan was simple: come together, talk things over, and figure out a way to respond to the fine, not with anger, but with something bold and meaningful. When the familiar rumble of engines and cars pulled into the driveway, Mark felt a surge of determination. One by one, his crew arrived, their faces lighting up when they saw the fire truck proudly parked where it belonged. It was more than a vehicle, it was a symbol of their shared history and values. Jim, the crew's unofficial spokesman, clapped Mark on the back. "This truck's a legend around here," he said. "Nobody should tell you where you can park it." The garage buzzed with energy as the crew settled in, sharing stories from their firefighting days and brainstorming ideas for their response. The mood was light but focused, fueled by camaraderie and a deep sense of purpose. Mark laid out the situation clearly. "The neighborhood's rules don't make sense to me. This truck belongs here. It's part of who we are. But we need to be smart about how we handle this." Terry, the crew's strategist, nodded. "We want to make a point, but it has to be something they can't ignore, something that gets people talking without crossing any lines." Ideas flew across the room. Some were practically organizing a neighborhood event featuring the fire truck and crew, educating people about the truck's history and importance. Others were more playful, imagining harmless pranks that would turn heads and start conversations. Laughter bubbled up as the group joked about harmless ways to get their message, like painting friendly reminders on the sidewalk or organizing a flash mob with fire safety messages. But beneath the humor was a serious current. This wasn't just about the truck. It was about respect, recognition, and the right to celebrate a shared heritage. Emma stopped by with snacks and refreshments, smiling as she saw the crew's lively energy. She had been quietly supporting Mark since the beginning, understanding the deep connection he had with his fire truck and crew. "You all look like you're up to something," she teased. Mark grinned, just trying to come up with a plan that makes sense. As the evening wore on, the group grew more confident. They agreed to a plan that would speak volumes without saying a word, a statement of presence and pride. Wrapped in a bit of mystery, Mark felt the weight on his shoulders lighten. He wasn't just facing this alone. He had a team behind him, ready to stand up for what mattered. Before everyone left, Mark took a moment to look around the garage. The fire truck gleamed under the lights, a beacon of their shared past and the fight ahead. "Thanks, everyone," Mark said sincerely. "Whatever happens next, I'm glad we're in this together." The crew nodded in agreement, their faces set with quiet determination. As the last car pulled away and the garage door closed, Mark felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fine had sparked something bigger than he'd expected a chance to stand. Tall, surrounded by friends who shared his pride and passion, the next steps wouldn't be easy. But with the crew at his side, Mark was ready for whatever came next. Outside, a fire truck stood proudly, waiting for the next chapter. The garage hummed with quiet anticipation. Mark and his crew sat around a makeshift table of toolboxes and coolers, their faces illuminated by the glow of a single hanging light. Ideas had been flowing all evening, but now it was time to settle on a plan, something clever, unforgettable, and just mischievous enough to send a clear message without crossing any lines. Mark looked around at the determined faces of his old firefighting friends. This wasn't just about a truck anymore. It was about standing up for pride, respect, and the memory of years spent protecting the community. Jim leaned forward, breaking the silence. "We don't want to cause trouble, but we do want to get their attention. Something symbolic, something that makes them think twice." Terry nodded in agreement. "What if we use fire symbolically? Of course, the truck, the crew, fire. It all fits. Maybe a controlled burn somewhere that sends a message without putting anyone or anything at risk." The group exchanged glances. A controlled burn could work, but it had to be executed perfectly. It couldn't endanger property or wildlife, and it had to be done with safety and respect. Mark's eyes lit up. What about the fence? The association's fence bordering my property has always been this quiet reminder of rules and boundaries. What if we make a little accidental fire near it? Small, contained, and harmless. Just enough to say we're here and we won't be ignored. Laughter rippled through the room. The idea was bold, cheeky, and perfect. It wasn't about destruction. It was about symbolism. Over the next few days, the crew planned every detail carefully. They mapped out the area near the fence that would be safe to use, away from dry brush and anything flammable. They arranged fire extinguishers and hoses, ready to act immediately if anything went wrong. Mark made sure to get the local fire department's schedule, just in case they needed a quick call, though he was confident in his crew's skills. The night of the plan arrived. The neighborhood was quiet, stars twinkling overhead. Mark and his crew met at the edge of the property. Their faces shadowed, but their spirits high. Mark's hands felt steady as he lit the small, carefully prepared pile of brush near the fence. Flames flickered softly, contained and controlled. Casting dancing shadows on the wood, the fire crackled gently. No bigger than a campfire, but its presence was impossible to miss. As planned. The crew stood watchful, extinguishing the fire as soon as it reached a predetermined size, ensuring nothing escaped their careful control. Mark smiled, feeling a mix of relief and satisfaction. The message was clear. This was their land, their story. And they weren't going anywhere quietly. The next morning, the neighborhood buzzed with news. A small fire had been spotted near the association's fence, but it had been quickly put out, leaving only faint scorch marks behind. Speculation ran wild. Who could have done it? Was it an accident or something else? Mark stayed calm. He said nothing, letting the mystery linger. The find had sparked a fire literally and figuratively, and now it was up to the neighborhood to decide what it meant. Inside, the crew shared quiet smiles and knowing glances. Oh, their plan had worked exactly as intended. But beneath the humor and symbolism, Mark felt a deep sense of responsibility. This wasn't a game. This was a statement. A reminder of respect and presence. As neighbors talked and wondered, Mark prepared for the next steps. The fire was out, but the conversation was just beginning. He glanced at the fire truck parked proudly in front of his house, its red paint shining like a beacon. It was more than metal and machinery. It was a symbol of pride, resilience, and the unspoken bond between Mark and his crew. And now, it was also a spark that might change the neighborhood story. The neighborhood had always been peaceful, quiet enough that you could hear the rustle of leaves and the distant hum of cars on the nearby highway. But that night something was different, something that made the usual calm feel a little tense. A little electric dot. Mark sat in his living room, the soft glow of the fire truck's dashboard light casting a warm red hue through the window. The phone rang suddenly, breaking the silence. 'Twas Emma, her voice calm but edged with surprise. "Mark, did you hear about the fire near the fence?" she asked. Mark's heart skipped a beat. "No, what happened?" "A small fire broke out around midnight, right near the association's fence by your property line. It was put out quickly, no one was hurt, but the fire department came out to check." Mark took a deep breath. The timing was suspicious, but the fire was so contained and so carefully controlled. It felt like something else entirely. Later that night, Mark met up quietly with his crew. They gathered at the edge of his property, where the scorched remains of the fence stood as silent testimony. Smell of burnt wood hung in the air. "This is exactly what we wanted," Mark said quietly. "Enough to get their attention, but nothing more." "No harm done," Jim nodded. "People are talking. They're wondering if it was an accident or if someone's making a statement." "We gave them that choice," Terry added. "It's a mystery." Is the message? Word spread fast the next day. Conversations buzzed over backyard fences, at the grocery store, and during morning jogs. The small fire had become the talk of the neighborhood, a puzzle that everyone wanted to solve. At the community center, the association's board held an emergency meeting. Mark wasn't invited, but he heard about it through a neighbor. The board members were concerned. They discussed security cameras, patrol schedules, and ways to prevent something like this from happening again. Yet, no one could deny that the fire had shaken things up. It was a reminder that the neighborhood wasn't just a collection of rules. It was home to real people with real stories. Mark stayed out of the spotlight, choosing to observe rather than engage. He understood that escalation wouldn't help. This was about patience and strategy, about waiting for the right moment to step forward. Meanwhile, his crew quietly maintained the fire truck and their friendships, offering support without fanfare. They met for casual dinners, shared stories, and kept the spirit of their plan alive at night. Mark often stood outside beside his fire truck, watching the fence and the soft glow of streetlights. The charred wood was a mark of defiance, but also a symbol of care taken not to cross the line between boldness and recklessness. Despite the tension, something had changed in the neighborhood. The conversation wasn't just about rules. Anymore, it was about respect, history, and the meaning of community. Emma noticed the shift too. "People are starting to see you differently," she said one evening. "Not just as the guy with the fire truck, but as someone who stands for something." Mark smiled. That was the plan. But beneath the surface, he knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy. The board's next moves, the whispers in the neighborhood, and the slow rebuilding of trust were all part of a larger story, one he was determined to see through. For now, the fire was out, but the embers were still glowing. The crew's message had been delivered, and the neighborhood was listening. Mark's fire truck stood quietly outside, a proud sentinel ready for whatever came next. The association's emergency meeting left a ripple of unease across the neighborhood. Though Mark wasn't formally invited, word spread fast. Neighbors whispered in hushed tones, and curiosity buzzed just beneath the surface of everyday interactions. The small fire near the fence had unsettled the usual quiet, and people were looking for answers. At the same time, Mark kept a calm exterior. He knew from years on the fire line that sometimes the best response was patience and observation. Wasn't interested in escalating tensions. Instead, he focused on listening, watching how the neighborhood reacted. The morning after the meeting, Mark's driveway filled with familiar faces as firefighting crew, stopping by to check in. They were united, their support unwavering. Jim clapped Mark on the shoulder, his expression serious but steady. "The board's tight-lipped," Jim said. "They're frustrated, but they don't want to make this public. Seems like they're trying to keep control without losing face." Mark nodded. "They want to avoid drama, but this fire brought something to light. Rules aren't the only thing people care about." Terry added, "People are talking more openly now. Some are curious about the fire truck and the crew behind it. Others wonder if things can change." That afternoon, a neighborhood gathering was announced. It wasn't about the fire truck or the fence, at least. Not officially, but Mark knew the timing wasn't a coincidence. The association wanted to address the situation, gauge opinions, and try to steer the conversation. The community center buzzed with familiar faces when Mark arrived, quietly parking the fire truck nearby. He noticed the mix of expressions: curiosity, concern, and a hint of hope. Inside, the meeting began with polite introductions and a review of neighborhood guidelines. The association's board chair spoke carefully, emphasizing the importance of harmony and cooperation. Mark listened, waiting for the right moment. When the floor opened for questions, he stood and shared his story about the fire truck, its history, and what it represented to him and his crew. "My truck isn't just a vehicle," Mark said. "It's a symbol of years spent serving this community. I understand the need for rules, but sometimes it's about more than regulations. It's about pride, respect, and connection. A few heads nodded in agreement. Others shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. Jim chimed in next, sharing stories of the crew's past work rescues community events and the bonds they had forged over time. The atmosphere began to shift. What had started as a formal gathering became a genuine conversation. Neighbors shared memories, asked questions, and slowly began to see the fire truck and its crew in a new light. After the meeting, Mark stepped outside to find a small group of neighbors waiting. A woman approached, smiling warmly. "I didn't know the story behind the truck," she said. "Thanks for sharing. It means a lot to hear." Mark smiled. "It's part of who we are. I hope we can find ways to honor that while respecting the neighborhood." As the sun set, Mark felt a cautious optimism. The tension hadn't vanished, but a bridge was forming, a chance for understanding and progress. Back at home, Emma noticed the change too. "People are starting to listen," she said. "You stood your ground, but you did it with respect." Mark nodded. "Sometimes that's the hardest part." Despite the calm, Mark knew the road ahead was still uncertain. The fine hadn't been rescinded yet, and the association's next steps were unknown. But for the first time in weeks, he felt the balance shifting. His crew remained close, ready to support, but also reminding him to stay grounded that night. Mark stood beside his fire truck, the red paint shining under the porch light. The neighborhood was quieter now, but the spark of change was alive. He knew this was just one part of a bigger story, a story about pride, friendship, and standing up without tearing down, and Mark was ready to see it through, one step at a time. Days passed with a quiet intensity. Mark continued to maintain his routine, tending to the fire truck and spending time with Emma, but the fine still lingered like a shadow over their lives. The neighborhood's atmosphere had shifted since the small fire incident and the meeting, but resolution felt distant. One afternoon, as Mark was inspecting the truck's engine, a knock came at the door. He wiped his hands and opened it to find Mrs. Green, an older neighbor known for her quiet presence and keen observations. "I wanted to talk to you," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "about everything that's happened." Mark invited her inside. Emma poured tea as Mrs. Green settled into the living room chair, her eyes thoughtful. "I've lived here for over 30 years, Mrs. Green began. I've seen the neighborhood grow, change, and sometimes misunderstand each other. When I heard about the fine and the fire, I was concerned, but I also remembered your service. Your dedication to this community is something I've admired quietly." Mark listened carefully. It was unusual for Mrs. Green to speak so directly, but her sincerity was clear. "I've been attending the association meetings, and I know there's tension," she continued. "But I think there's room for understanding. Sometimes rules are made without considering the whole story." Mark nodded. "That's what I've been trying to express. The fire truck isn't just a vehicle, it's a piece of history and pride." Mrs. Green smiled slightly. "Exactly. I don't want to help you make sure that story is heard." Over the next weeks, Mrs. Green became an unexpected ally. Using her long-standing presence and respect within the neighborhood, she began attending meetings, quietly advocating for Mark's cause. She encouraged open dialogue, emphasizing respect for individual stories alongside community guidelines. Her calm voice and thoughtful approach slowly influenced the board's perspective. Where there had been frustration, a willingness to listen began to emerge. Mark and Emma found themselves invited to more neighborhood events, Splux cleanup days, and informal gatherings. The fire truck became a symbol not just of defiance but of connection. One evening, as Mark and Emma set up chairs for a neighborhood barbecue, Mrs. Green approached. "The board is considering revisiting the rules about vehicle parking," she said softly. "Your story helped them see the importance of flexibility." Mark felt a swell of gratitude. "I never expected this. It means a lot." Mrs. Green nodded. "Sometimes, all it takes is someone willing to listen." The barbecue was lively, filled with laughter and conversation. Neighbors gathered around the fire truck, sharing stories and asking questions. Children took turns climbing into the cab, eyes wide with wonder. Mark and Emma watched from the porch, feeling a sense of peace they hadn't experienced in weeks. But beneath the warmth, Mark remained cautious. The fine hadn't been officially lifted, and the association's decisions were still pending. Yet, the tide had turned. Late that night, Mark stood by the truck reflecting on the journey so far. What had begun with a fine and a small fire had grown into a deeper conversation, one about respect, pride, and the bonds that hold a neighborhood together. His crew remained in close contact, ready to support if needed. But now, Mark knew that change was possible through understanding and patience. As the moon cast silver light on the red paint, Mark smiled quietly. The road ahead was still uncertain, but with allies like Mrs. Green and a neighborhood slowly opening its heart, he felt ready. This wasn't just about parking a fire truck anymore. It was about standing up for who you are and finding common ground without losing yourself, and that made all the difference. The days following the barbecue brought a cautious but growing sense of optimism to the neighborhood. Mark could feel it in the way neighbors greeted him, with genuine smiles, and stopped to chat about the fire truck, the small fire incident, and even the fine that had started it all. It was as if the walls of misunderstanding were beginning to crack, allowing light and connection to seep through. Mark's phone buzzed one afternoon with a message from Mrs. Green. "The board has scheduled a meeting to discuss the parking rules and your situation. They want to hear from you directly." His heart raced, but he welcomed the opportunity. This was the moment he had been preparing for, a chance to speak honestly, to bridge the gap, and to turn the tide. On the evening of the meeting, the community center was filled with more residents than Mark had seen in weeks. The air hummed with anticipation. As he entered, he noticed familiar faces from the neighborhood, some nodding in support, others still uncertain. The association board members sat at the front, their expressions a mix of formality and apprehension. Mark took a deep breath and stepped up when called. He began by recounting the history of his fire truck, how it wasn't just a vehicle, but a symbol of years of dedication, camaraderie, and service. He spoke about the pride he and his crew shared in their work and how the truck had always been a centerpiece of their identity. He acknowledged the association's concerns, but gently reminded everyone that rules should serve the community, not stifle its spirit. "This truck is part of the neighborhood story, too," Mark said. "It's a reminder that this community is built on more than regulations. It's built on the people who live here, their passions, their histories, and their respect for one another." The room was quiet, the weight of his words settling in. Then Mrs. Green stood up, her calm and steady voice backing Mark's message. "We all want a community that respects each other's stories. Flexibility and understanding can help us grow stronger." Several neighbors spoke next, sharing stories of their own connections to the truck and Mark's crew, emphasizing the value of acknowledging individual contributions to the neighborhood's character. The board chair cleared his throat and addressed the crowd. "We've heard you all. Recognize that sometimes our rules need revisiting to reflect the realities of those who live here. We will be drafting an updated policy regarding vehicle parking, especially for unique cases like this." Wave of relief and applause rippled through the room. Mark felt a swell of gratitude, knowing that months of tension and uncertainty were finally yielding to understanding and change. After the meeting, neighbors approached Mark with words of encouragement and thanks. Emma hugged him tightly, proud of the grace and strength he had shown that night. Mark stood beside his fire truck under the stars, feeling a deep sense of accomplishment. This was more than a victory over a fine, it was a victory for community, respect, and the power of standing firm without losing kindness. Yet even in celebration, Mark knew this was just one chapter of a larger story. Trust needed nurturing and relationships required care. But now, with open doors and open hearts, he felt ready to build that future alongside his neighbors. The fire truck gleamed softly in the moonlight, a proud beacon of resilience and hope. And for the first time in a long while, Mark could breathe a little easier. The days following the meeting carried an energy that felt almost unfamiliar but deeply welcome. The association's decision to revisit and revise the parking rules marked the beginning of a new chapter for Mark, his crew, and the neighborhood as a whole. Word spread quickly that the fine against Mark would be withdrawn, and with it came a sense of relief not just for him, but for many who had quietly supported his cause. The fire truck, once a source of conflict, was now a symbol of pride and resilience. Mark spent the next morning washing the truck's gleaming red hood, the sunlight making the paint shine like a beacon. Neighbors passed by, waving and stopping to chat. Children gathered around, eyes wide with fascination as Mark shared stories of his firefighting days. For the first time, the truck felt truly at home. Emma joined him with a smile, handing him a cold drink. "Looks like you're a neighborhood hero now," she teased. Mark laughed. "Feels like it. But it's really about all of us finding common ground." The crew continued to meet regularly, their bond stronger than ever. The ordeal had reminded them that pride and friendship weren't just words, they were lived through action and respect. They organized small community events from block parties to fire safety workshops. Turning what had been a source of tension into a platform for connection, Mrs. Green remained a steady presence. Her quiet wisdom guiding conversations and fostering goodwill. Thanks to her efforts, more neighbors began sharing their own stories, revealing a tapestry of experiences that enriched the community at the next association meeting. The revised parking guidelines were approved with enthusiasm. They included clear provisions that recognized unique vehicles like Mark's fire truck, balancing safety and aesthetics with respect for individual pride and history. The board chair publicly thanked Mark and the neighbors who had helped create a more understanding atmosphere. "This neighborhood is stronger because of your voices," he said. "Let's continue working together to make it a place where everyone belongs." Mark felt a swell of emotion. The journey had been difficult, marked by tension, silence, and uncertainty, but the outcome was worth every challenge. He realized that standing up for what mattered didn't mean creating division. It meant inviting dialogue, listening with openness, and never losing sight of shared humanity. One evening, Mark parked the fire truck near the community park where families gathered for an outdoor movie night. Children played nearby, laughter filling the air, and neighbors chatted comfortably. Emma rested her head on his shoulder as they watched the screen light up the night. "This feels right," she whispered. Mark nodded. "It does. We fought for respect, but we gained so much more: friendship, understanding, community." As the credits rolled, Mark thought about the road that had brought him here: the fines, the fire, the meetings, and the quiet allies who had made the difference. His fire truck wasn't just a vehicle anymore. It was a symbol of resilience and connection. In the days and years to come, Mark knew challenges would arise. But now, he carried with him the lessons of patience, courage, and grace. The neighborhood wasn't just a place on a map, was a living story shaped by the people who cared enough to listen, to stand, and to build bridges, and that was a future worth fighting for.